Hello, this is Scott Eustace recording for the Louisiana Master Naturalist. Estuarine session takes place at SURF. This is an adaptation of an intro college lecture on the fishes of Lake Pontchartrain based on some long-term monitoring data collected back in 2008 for Dr. O'Connell's lab, the Necton Research Lab at UNO with Chris Sheebley on the RV Kavala. And I was the TA during fall 2008 at UNO with the Pontchartrain Institute of Environmental Sciences. That's what Pontchartrain Beach used to look like in the 30s. We are hoping it gets restored by the foundation sometime now that we're in 2013. What is the lake? There are many different fishes in the lake, and when we go out to what's called different stations in the lake, different places in the lake, and we've come to characterize those stations for 5 different areas in Lake Pontchartrain. The northwest area, the northeast area, which is probably the most naturalized shoreline, still has a lot of submerged vegetation, some clean flowing rivers. The northwest has a lot of freshwater rivers, but they're connected with dairy farms and other septic problems. So you got a little poop problems in there. You have the southwest area of the lake, which partly has armored shoreline in the Kenner area, a nice swamp in the Manchac area. But then the spillway in between those, so periodically it's inundated with fresh water from the Mississippi River and also creatures that come from that freshwater pulse. We have the southeastern part of the lake, which is connected to, is also totally armored, has the major problems with the stormwater problems that come from New Orleans during rain events, and it's also connected to some of the artificial shipping channels like the Mr. Go. The east-east, or the EE, is kind of the natural outlet. It's the natural basin into which the lake pours and then pours out of the Wrigley's and Chef Mentor, where I normally give this lecture at the Surf Research Station. And so that area tends to have more marine creatures than the default, because it has the most marine influence, the most natural marine influence, as opposed to the unnatural marine influence that the southeast has. And those are the areas to consider and the different things to consider when we talk about different fish habitats across the lake. Generally, we speak about different life histories for fishes that we catch in the lake with different particular gear. And I would say there's 3 main categories for the sake of this very introductory lecture. And we've called them estuarine affinity categories. How does the creature use the estuary in its life history? Of course, Lake Pontchartrain is actually a bay. It's connected both to the Gulf of Mexico and thus the ocean, and it formerly was connected to the Mississippi River more directly, now intermittently. Most fish species that we discuss and that we see in Lake Pontchartrain in the 3 different types of gear we use are what you call estuarine-dependent species. That is, they don't live all their lives in the estuary, but without the estuaries, they could not persist. I think this is over 3/4 of the species in the Gulf of Mexico migrate into the shallow water estuaries as larval and juvenile fishes and grow bigger and get to plate size in 1 or 2 years, and then migrate out to the Gulf as adults to spawn. So that you'll see that life history pattern over and over again. Blue crab, the Penaeid shrimp, the speckled trout, and redfish. Most of your big commercial species are estuarine dependent, but there's many, many other species. Flounder, all estuarine dependent. They spawn offshore. The eggs are laid offshore. The larvae float into the estuary, use the shallow water environment to find food and hide from predators, grow big, sometimes really quickly, and then become adults and migrate out again to the marine environment. So without those estuaries as a secondary nursery, those creatures, their populations decline. But they don't always live in the estuary, so we call them estuarine dependent. Now, there are fish that live in Lake Pontchartrain all year round, and they tend to be shallow water species. And we call them resident, so they live all of their life in the lake. And usually, when we speak about a resident fish, it's a fish that can't migrate because it's so small. I'm trying to think of some larger resident fishes, but most resident fishes that we're going to speak about do not move. And then we have the transient fishes that are mostly adults coming into the lake for food, either transient from freshwater environments, migrating into the intermediate lake. The lake is less than brackish. It's what you call oligohaline, or a little bit salty. It's not, brackish is more, I would say 15, which is more your oyster salinity. We have such a huge estuary in Louisiana that we have a separate category that's just a little bit salty. You also get marine animals coming into the shallow water environment as adults to feed. So think of bull sharks, predators that can come into the lake and do in the summer to feed on the bigger fish. That by the summertime, there's fish big enough, large enough to sustain those large adult animals. But they're not dependent on the estuary to spawn. They spawn on sandy beaches and islands out in the marine environment. And here's kind of the way to think of where these fish come from. So in the southeast and the east, we have the saltwater transient adults coming in through the passes. We get estuarine fishes, dependent fishes everywhere, coming in spring, leaving by the fall. We get freshwater fishes that come into the lake via these big rain events and pulses and the opening of the spillway. And in our shallow water environments where we still have intact shoreline, i.e. not New Orleans, the greater New Orleans area, we can sustain our resident fishes with that we have a nice sloping bank line into a littoral environment. And in fact, here are the next three terms to learn. So we have three categories of life history. Here's three categories of where we see fishes in the lake. And these are also related to how we catch fishes in the lake. When we speak about littoral fishes, these are fishes that are only found in shallow water, and they tend to be resident fishes, and we tend to catch them with the seine net, which is a shallow water capture device. It's just, if you've never seen a seine net, it's just a wall of net, weights on the bottom, floats on the top, goes across the entire water column, which is shallow. You drag it from the water onto the land and pull up lots and lots of fish. A pelagic fish is a fish that doesn't need any kind of structure. It doesn't need the safety of shallow water or vegetation that grows in the shallow water. Usually these are fishes that are born to swim, and you can tell by their shapes that all they do is swim. Think of a tuna. The fish does nothing but swim its entire life, and if you stop it from swimming, it suffers. And then you have a benthic or a demersal fish, a bottom-oriented fish. This is a fish that's found out in the deeper water, but it is associated with the bottom environment. It can rest on the bottom, it can stay on the bottom, or you have other uses, but it tends to be flat on the bottom, so it can rest. It's a benthic fish. There's other information we think about when we look at the different fishes, and we'll talk about this as we go through. What the fish eats, and what can we tell about the shape of the mouth? How does that tell us what it eats? Does it have an economic or human importance? And are there specialized behaviors? Again, the shape of the fish can tell us a lot about those. Now, the first one, if you only know 5, I think it's these first 5, but this is the #1 fish in the lake by numbers. It's the bay anchovy. It's an estrogen-dependent fish. You can look at that, the body shape, and it is not flat on the bottom, and tell that it is a pelagic fish. It's going to be migrating in and out. So it's not a littoral fish. It's not a resident fish. It's an estrogen-dependent pelagic fish. And if you look at its mouth, it has a terminal or subterminal mouth. The jaw extends far past the eye. So when that fish opens its mouth, it's a large net. That's an indication that this fish is a filter feeder, and indeed it feeds on algae and zooplankton, and that's why its food is everywhere. Its food is in the water column. It doesn't need structure to find its food. So it's because it can feed so low on the trophic scale and it's small enough, it's one of the most abundant fishes in the lake. The bay anchovy, Anchovy machili. Oh, and here's a picture of anchovies. I think this is the different species, but basically you can see what the fish looks like when it opens its big net of a mouth to capture plankton for food. #2 species in the lake, formerly #1, it's a picture from NOAA of an Atlantic croaker. Now this species, like a redfish, it's a cousin of a redfish, is estrogen dependent. And you can tell it's a benthic species because it's relatively flat on the bottom, and it also has a subterminal mouth. The mouth ends before the nose. It's got a bit of a nose there compared, and the anchovy's got a bit of a nose, but this has a whole honker, and so does the redfish, especially the big redfish. You'll see they have a big old nose, and that tells you that this fish, the mouth is on the bottom, so the fish's food is on the bottom, and indeed, croaker, like a lot of drum, eat a lot of clams, Rangia clams. So yeah, it's an estrogen-dependent fish, spawns offshore, comes into the estuary as a juvenile. It used to be recreationally important, and used to find more bull croakers, as they call them, big croakers. They're good size to eat, but yay. But its numbers have declined in part because this fish, and indeed this size, as pictured in this photograph, is particularly vulnerable to shrimp bycatch. So very important, used to be #1 by now #2, indicating that some of the changes we've had in our ecosystem, as well as the vulnerability of this species to shrimping bycatch. Another one caught in some of the bycatch, and mostly the wingnet shrimpers, not the trawl. And the wingnet shrimpers fish the top of the water column in the middle of the water, so they're going to catch more of a pelagic fish, this Gulf menhaden, whereas the trawls catch this, the nets crawl along the bottom and catch this benthic fish, the Atlantic croaker. This is a very important fish. Again, the mouth big enough to open that big net of the mouth, catch plankton, it's a filter feeder. It's important for the ecosystem. It's important for the economy. It's another fish. This is the largest fisheries species by weight in Louisiana, and maybe even, and I think because it's the largest in Louisiana, that makes it the largest by weight in the Gulf of Mexico. This fish is in everything. It's if you ever heard of omega-3 supplements, that's Gulf menhaden. If you've seen organic fish oil fertilizer, Gulf menhaden. Omega-3 in your bread, Gulf menhaden. Pig feed for CAFO farms and other animal feed operations, Gulf menhaden. Pet food, a lot of Gulf menhaden. So it's all from the Gulf, all from Louisiana. It's caught in these big blue boats. The spotter planes go out, spy the school of shimmering silver fish. The big boat, the freezer boat, goes out. 2 little boats come around, put a purse seine around the school of fish, and then the workers on the factory boat lower a large vacuum into the school of fish and vacuum the fish right into the freezer. It's sent to the processors where it's ground up into meal, into fertilizer, or dietary supplements, or cosmetics even, or animal feed. This is the fish, and again, there's so many of these. They're very abundant. They're a very big part of the biomass, and they're very important for filtering plankton in the ecosystem. They're also important for feeding a lot of the larger predators, especially dolphins and some of the larger sport fishes like striper. Here, this picture is from the Smithsonian, is a resident fish. This is an adult fish, where some of these others, this is maybe a young adult. This is definitely a subadult juvenile fish. This is an adult anchovy. But this fish is a resident fish. It only gets to this size, and it lives all year round in the estuary. It's the inland silicide, the Menidia berolina. It's got that nice silver stripe on it, so does the anchovy. So how do we tell them apart? Well, again, we can look at the mouth, and we can look at its mouth. See, it's a very small mouth, and that's a mouth made for eating insects and other small bits of protein which are very abundant in the estuary. Yeah. Here we have the Gulf killifish, or the Kakaho minnow, Fundulus grandis, and it is also a resident species that lives year-round in the estuary. This fish is a model organism in different studies, probably because they're very hardy in the aquarium environment. A lot of resident fishes can take extremes of temperature and oxygen level and changing salinities, because they've got to be tough, because they live in a place, the estuary, that's changing all the time. The floods come, the oxygen levels go up and down, the drought comes and water levels are really low. This fish has got to survive. So it's tough cookie. It's also a bait fish. If you fish redfish, you'll come across these as bait. In the BP Horizon disaster, some of the residual oils that were left in the Louisiana marshes caused deformations in these fish, causing them to grow with abnormal hearts, which will probably impede them from reproducing. So we know there are impacts, even though these fish are so abundant out in the marshes. If we ever see their numbers go under a decline, this kind of fish, if this thing goes, so much of the ecosystem is affected. Again, a small mouth for eating insects and other small bits of protein. A relative is the long-nosed killifish. Right. We have fishes that migrate, have different patterns of migration. We have the American eel, which goes far out to sea to spawn and goes all the way up into the fresh water. Here we see one caught in Bayou St. John. The least puffer, another resident species, very unique. You can look at its mouth and know that it has a very unique diet. It has a flat bottom, so it likes the bottom, but it also can puff itself up as a response to predators. The rainwater killifish is one we'll often catch if we do seine netting at Surf or at Turtle Cove. It's very nondescript. Here's a speckled trout. This is an estuarine. This is an adult picture from Langstaff. Again, this is a estuarine-dependent drum species, so it's related to the redfish. It spawns offshore comes into the marshes to grow from a little fish to plate size and bigger. But it's definitely a predator. And it's definitely a stronger swimmer than the redfish. You look at its mouth. Its mouth is more oriented. It's a terminal mouth. You look in its mouth. It has lots of sharp teeth. So this is a fish that eats other fish. And of course, it's recreationally important. There's very, very many of this top predator fish, which gives you an idea of just how productive this estuarine ecosystem is. The limit for recreational sport fishing of this fish is 25 per person per boat. That's an incredible amount of speckled trout that are out there. And they're good eating. This is a juvenile, so this is more like what it looks like when it comes into the shallow water marsh environment as a little baby. It's darker. It's more camouflaged. It's nice and ugly. Here's a speckled trout caught in Bayou St. John. Even before they started opening the gates, the trout would migrate through the butterfly bowels of that old dam as a small fish, and then eat fish and grow up inside of Bayou St. John and grow too big to escape, probably, because this is a fish that would want to escape Bayou St. John, try to swim through those butterfly bowels. But it was stuck, so we caught it. The red drum, the redfish, everyone's favorite to eat. It's got a bit of a subterminal mouth there. It's got a big of a nose on this this is kind of a subadult from the picture from the Smithsonian. Again, estuarine-dependent fish. Spawns offshore. We catch the big ones offshore, but they will definitely come into the marsh to grow up and also to feed. And here's a bigger bull red from Twyla and off the picture from the Kabbalah. They have they're Scalos ocellatus, so they have that dark spot on their caudal fin. Here's a picture of a big catch of black drum that we caught in the northeast part of the lake, feeding. You can see the sizes. I think that's Chris's shoe. Just how big these drum can get. This is another cousin of the redfish. It's also estuarine dependent. Spawns offshore, comes in to grow, and also to feed on the many, many rangia clams that exist still on the North Shore. It's got that subterminal mouth, so it can, look for clams. It also has large these chin things, right? It's not like a catfish. It has several barbels on its chin. Those are to feel for the clams that it feeds on. This is the white trout. It's a relative of the speckled trout. They're very much more abundant than speckled trout, and this is a common feature of bycatch, both trawl and from the wing net shrimpers. It's just not, the flesh isn't as firm, so it's less marketable as the speckled trout. It's very, very abundant out there, and good eating if you can get it fresh. Another relative, another drum species, it's also estuarine dependent, is the spot. It's also a benthic or demersal species. It's flatter on the bottom with a little bit of the subterminal mouth. And its spot is different than the redfish's spot. This fish's spot is behind the opercle, behind the gill opening, above the pectoral fin, right at the lateral line. And you can also tell the spot by the fact that the caudal fin is concave rather than pointy. If you look at the juvenile speckled trout, the caudal fin points out, and that's the same for all of the juvenile redfish, juvenile croaker. And then the adults, are neutral or they point out a little bit. The spot, the fin is concave. Another drum species that's estuarine dependent is the Gulf killifish. It really has a bit of a honker there of a nose and one big barbel. Sorry, the Gulf kingfish. What did I say? silver perch, very yellow, another drum. The southern flounder. This is a very special looking fish, but it's definitely a benthic fish, and it's an ambush predator. It uses its association with the bottom and its ability to change its spots to blend in with sandy bottom environments. So it's hidden from fish that it would eat with its sharp, sharp teeth. I don't know if you could see that in the picture there. But it's another fish that's dependent on the estuary to grow. And we pick these up at Turtle Cove sometimes. These are hog chokers. You can see they're kind of, it should be facing the other way. Sorry about that. If the southern flounder is pointed to the left, hog chokers, the eyes are above the mouth if it's pointed to the right. Here the eyes are below the mouth. So it's actually flipped on a different side than the flounder. So it's more like a sole. But this is a smaller fish as an adult. It's not as tasty, and in fact, it's very grippy. Like it has this texture to it that makes it stick to your hand or stick to the sampling materials. And the wives' tale is that it's called the hog choker because if the pig goes to eat it, it sticks in the pig's throat. It's very sticky. But again, it's estuarine dependent. Here's a whole mess of them pulled up in the shrimp trawl. Here's a juvenile striped bass. This was caught at Pontchartrain Beach in the seine net. It's behind me. You see it's very small, not those big old stripers that are caught on the East Coast. But here in the shallow water environment, this estuarine dependent fish grows from subadult to adult. Here's a different species of anchovy. It's bigger than the bay anchovy. It's the broad stripe anchovy. Still estuarine dependent, still a plankton feeder, a filter feeder, yeah, just a different kind of anchovy in the lake. Sometimes you capture these big freshwater fish way out on Pontchartrain Beach. It was after a big storm that flushed the rivers of the North Shore, pushed a lot of fresh water east. We got this blue catfish, which is a species you normally find in past Manchac, all the way in the eastern part of the lake. This species of fish is what we catch in past, Middendorfs. This is what they serve. You see people fishing in the river, Mississippi River, despite wisdom that you should not. That's this species, the blue catfish. It's a freshwater species that you'll find in the lake. It comes in either flushed out or it comes searching for food. And here's one from the Mississippi River that had albinism. It was quite fascinating. The lake is a very interesting place. Sometimes I think of it as the airport. Not a lot of people, well, most species don't live in the airport, but all of them pass through it. And here you have this unique interaction after a good rain. You have an estuarine-dependent blue crab feeding on a freshwater predator, the largemouth bass. After the spillway opened, we saw lots of alligator and spotted gar come into the lake in the southeastern area from the Mississippi River, presumably, flushed out into what's normally an oligohalian environment. But they can feed in that environment and survive. Here's another picture. If it's spotted. I don't know. I guess is it an alligator? I guess it was an alligator. The Spanish mackerel is a pelagic species caught in the gill net, and it's a marine predator. You can tell it's pelagic by the shape of its caudal fin. This fish was one of those fish that was born to swim and does nothing but eat other fish. Here's another marine species. Again, it's not flat on the bottom. It's got a terminal mouth. This is the leather jacket. This is an adult, so it's kind of small, but it has these spines to prevent predation. A common species in the lake, and probably the most Probably the biggest species by weight we get in our catches. That is to say, if you randomly picked out a pound of fish flesh out of Lake Pontchartrain, chances are it would be this fish because they're both abundant and very large. Mullet are kind of the same way. This fish and the mullet are kind of make up the biomass of the lake. And the dolphins come into the lake feeding off of these things. The spines are very, very large. And I say it's marine, but ... because it is somewhat estuarine dependent, not on the shallow water environment, but when it spawns these eggs and broods the eggs in the mouth of the male, and the male stays in the estuary and does not feed while it incubates the eggs from the spring through the summer and into the fall. So it does use the estuarine environment, but to incubate its eggs rather than to grow from a small to a large creature. So I would, some references have this as an estuarine dependent fish, but I would say that this is more of a marine animal that uses some shallow water environments. It's really not as dependent on the marshes as it is just shallow water. Same thing for the hardhead catfish, which you may have caught on your line. Very common fish, doesn't get as big as the gaff top. The male broods the large eggs inside of its mouth through the spring and summer. An interesting creature that we have in the estuary, and we used to catch in the Mr. Go, but probably hasn't been caught there in quite some time, in the trawl, is the brief squid. It's the only squid able to regulate its salinity sufficient to survive in the estuarine environment. So there's such low salinities, but it's about as big as your hand and would be found in the trawl net. A fish we only find in the Chandeleur Islands in the Pontchartrain estuary is the lemon shark. In fact, we documented in the Necton lab the northernmost breeding grounds, and maybe the only breeding grounds in the Gulf of Mexico for the lemon shark. These are babies. It says juvenile. This animal is probably an hour old. It still has the umbilical scar. When these guys grow up, they're 5-6 feet long, and they are threatened, so we're concerned about conservation of the Chandeleur Islands, the marshes, and the mangrove forest of the Chandeleur Islands, and the seagrasses behind the Chandeleur Islands, because that's the habitat that these young sharks need to mature into bigger individuals. The Gulf sturgeon is anadromous. Unlike the eel, which is catadromous, both of these animals make the full migration from the tiniest freshwater out to the sea. The eel spawns out in the sea. The Gulf sturgeon spawns in cobbly, cold, freshwater streams up away from the Gulf, and then spends the summer out on the shelf. So it's a great fish for conservation because it needs the whole river system to be connected to the Gulf. And I say that it's because it's so dependent on all of the habitats, it's very threatened and even endangered. Across the Gulf Coast, where we have a more intact coast in Florida, the numbers are more abundant. The Pearl River had 200 individuals, it was estimated, when the Temple Inland paper mill blew up. It killed 25 individuals. So documented. So we estimate there's very few Gulf sturgeon left in the Pearl River system. And at GRN, we fight dams on the Pearl River because there's a very good paper that came out recently on the impact that these multiple dams have on the breeding success of the sturgeon. Dams, some of which have no effect anymore. There are 2 dams and a multiple lock and sill system on the West Pearl River that used to keep enough water in the West Pearl to float timber barges. Well, guess what? We have trucks now. We don't use timber barges. Those navigation projects are completely unused, and even they even threaten towns with flooding when the river gets really high and threatens to overtop the structures, which would release a whole mess of water all at once. Anyways, organizations like Gulf Restoration Network, Lake Country and Basin Foundation, Louisiana Wildlife and Fisheries are all working, the Sierra Club are all working to either make fish ladders or completely remove these sills so that this fish can thrive in the Pearl River again, along with so many other fish that need an intact river system, and would use those cool, cobbly, small freshwater streams to spawn. The bluefish is a predator that comes following the menhaden into the shallow water environment, but mostly find it as a pelagic fish caught with a gill net, pictured here, in the marine environment. And it's definitely a marine animal. The ladyfish is a predator. It comes in to spawn. It's estuarine dependent. But it's definitely a pelagic fish. You might have heard this referred to as the 10-pounder because they put up a lot of fight on the line. We get juvenile bull sharks in the lake. Don't quite know where they spawn, but this is a little bitty guy. You catch them in the gill net in the peak of summer. And I don't know if this one made it. Maybe that's why I'm not happy. Sometimes the gear takes the animal. Most of the time they live. This is the cutlass fish or belt fish. If you go to Hong Kong market, people eat this. It doesn't have scales. It's a completely pelagic fish. There's nothing to it. It's a big swimmer. It's a predator. Right. Marine fish. So most of these fish, when they're in the lake, they're going to be in the eastern part of the lake, associated with the Wrigley's of Shep Pass or the Industrial Canal. Even though the Mr. Go is closed, you still get these big fish coming through, seeking that flow that moves in and out of the lake through the Industrial Canal. This was caught in a gill net right off the Lake Pontchartrain Airport there. It's a Jack Crevalle. It's a big sport fish. And again, just like the tuna, it has that big crescent moon tail. You can tell that this fish is pelagic. It's made to swim. Oh, the baywhiff is not the greatest specimen, but another estuarine-dependent flounder-like species. Oh, this is a grass that's common in the lake. It's the root beer grass. It's very thin, and the flowers are tiny. In the summertime, the tiny yellow flowers. This is, again, on the northeastern quadrant of the lake by Goose Point, Big Branch. If you do some of the canoe trips out of Cane Bayou, you'll see this submerged aquatic vegetation. It's submerged, it grows under the water. It doesn't emerge from the water. You can see how it waves with the surface because it only grows submerged. And it's anchored in the bottom. This is a bacteria, I think, or perhaps a protozoan, excuse me. But it grows commonly on crab traps as well as you pick it up in the gill net and other fishing gear, and it gets on your clothes. So your white shirt is a collection device. Here is the threatened diamondback terrapin. This is Mrs. T's sister. If you've seen Mrs. T at the surf, it's Malacomys terrapin, and it's the pileated subspecies here on the Gulf Coast. I think on the Louisiana, the East Bank part of Louisiana, I think the subspecies is the pileated. And judging, this was caught as bycatch in a wingnet shrimp operation The animal was fine. We released it. I believe it was a female based on the size, but we're kind of in a hurry just to get her back in the marsh. So yeah, here's some pictures of bycatch. So some of these fishes captured in the shrimp net, counted, let go. You can see they're a consistent size, and a lot of them are pelagic or demersal benthic. Spot various species of look down, a sea robin. There's some shrimp, some triple-tailed juveniles, which we found on Pontchartrain Beach one day. We were excited to document that. Got a little bit roughed up in the net, but this guy survived. That's all.